So looking in a different direction in the 1920s, we're going to spend a little time looking about the art and architecture of the time period. The art form of the 1920s reflected the trend of more money, more sophisticated careers, and more college graduates. The art demonstrated bold colors, crafty designs, and streamlined structures. It was recognized as a result of design exhibition that was held in Paris in 1925. Art Deco became a popular design style in the 1920s and 30s. Main elements of the Art Deco architecture were its non-structural decorative elements and its focus on modernity, characterized by the crisp, symmetrical geometric forms. New York skyscrapers such as the Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building are examples of 1920s and 30s era Art Deco architectural style. In fact, the Empire State Building is considered to be one of the world's greatest examples of Art Deco design. The movies. Silent films continued to dominate through the first two-thirds of the decade. Directors such as Cecil DeMille and D.W. Griffith controlled the industry in the 1920s. Epic films such as The Ten Commandments and comedies such as Charlie Chaplin's The Kid set the standard for silent films. Clara Bow was known as the It Girl after she starred in the movie It. She became the first standard for the new woman of the 1920s. Al Jolson starred in the first movie with sound, The Jazz Singer, in 1927. Harlem and the Renaissance. Can you explain the term Renaissance in your own words? Well, the 1920s offered up many eclectic and daring forms of art, literature, and music. And in that decade, African American art, literature, and music began to flourish in Harlem. This cultural movement became known as the New Negro Movement, or the Harlem Renaissance. Many factors contributed to the development of Harlem, but one of them included the African American urban migration from rural areas to large cities, and trends towards social and artistic experimentation. Never before had so many Americans read the thoughts of African Americans and embraced the African American community's productions, expressions, and styles as they did during the 1920s. Literature took on an interesting and much needed turn in the 1920s with the writings of African American authors coming to the forefront of the Harlem Renaissance movement. Probably the best known of all Harlem Renaissance writers was Langston Hughes. One of his best known Renaissance period poems was The Negro Speaks of Rivers. Listen as Hughes reads his poem.
I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers.
Theater was also very important during this time and the Harlem Renaissance. Paul Robeson starred in 11 films and numerous plays. He earned international acclaim and an award for his best acting performance for his lead role in the Broadway Othello. This is Robeson reading from Othello.
And so when they come for him from Venice, he speaks and saith, "Soft you! A word or two before you go. I have done the state some service, and they know it.
Jazz. Music. Although he became better known in the 1930s and 40s, Duke Ellington revolutionized jazz music in the 1920s by taking music originally intended for small bands and producing it in orchestra settings. He worked in small nightclubs as well as large venues such as Carnegie Hall. This audio clip features Ellington's popular Take the A Train.
Take the A train to find the quickest way to get to Harlem. If you...
The voice was Florence Mills. She got her big break when she landed the lead in a 1921 musical, Shuffle Along. Her dancing ability, coupled with her soprano voice, shot her straight to stardom. Now, Harlem wasn't the only place where literature was expanding. The Lost Generation. Self-destruction, self-pitying, and overly indulgent of their habits. The authors of The Lost Generation might be akin to the drug-addicted lost rock stars of today. The Lost Generation was a group of writers whose work reflected the horror of the death and destruction of World War I and the scorn they had for the middle-class consumerism and superficiality of the post-war years. They focused on the emptiness of the pursuit of money and social status, the closed-mindedness of society, and people dissatisfied with their lives but afraid to change. Popular writers of the Lost Generation included Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald.
A group of writers who were discontented with life in post-war America fled to Europe. While living in Paris, writers like Ernest Hemingway and Gertrude Stein wrote great novels that dealt with the themes of loss and discontent felt by many Americans after World War I. Stein dubbed this group the Lost Generation, and together they struggled to find meaning in what they saw as a senselessly changed world.
Very doom and gloom with the Lost Generation. So let's pick things up in this age of contradiction and look at jazz music. Jazz migrated north from New Orleans. As it did that, the need to arrange songs into a set structure arose as groups of musicians grew larger. Musical performances moved from small nightclubs to large ballrooms with dance floors. The big band sounds were extremely popular during this time, and the movement within them had an arranged yet flowing sound that became known as swing, which became extremely popular in the 1930s.
Like the decade itself, jazz was fast, loud, and raucous, uninhibited, joyous, and highly controversial. It came from the dance halls and clubs of an oppressed people, African Americans from the nation's South, who had been flooding into northern cities since the First World War. Born in New Orleans, jazz traveled up the Mississippi to Kansas City and the south side of Chicago, then moved on to New York City's Harlem.
The big bands. Fletcher Henderson led the most commercially successful of African American jazz bands of the 1920s. The Fletcher Henderson Orchestra was its name. Henderson was one of the first band leaders to give an unusual young trumpet player a start. His name was Louis Armstrong. Henderson was also the first African American to join an all-white orchestra on stage. Jelly Roll Morton, who formed Jelly Roll Morton and his orchestra, was the first great composer, piano player of jazz. Cab Calloway played with the band called the Missourians, and later the Cotton Club Orchestra. One of the earliest groups to record was the California Ramblers. New Orleans was home to so many jazz musicians. Louis Armstrong, nicknamed Satchmo, was the greatest of all jazz musicians. His amazing technical abilities and spontaneity still dominate jazz. Armstrong joined King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band in 1922 and eventually formed his own Louis Armstrong's Orchestra. Along with his trumpet and cornet playing, his distinctive, gravely voice made Armstrong an American musical icon. Hoagy Carmichael is one of the greatest composers of the jazz age. He is best known for the songs he wrote, but he did make a name for himself as a performer with the 1927 classic Stardust. The tone of blues is melancholy. Songs of sadness, despair, and heaviness filled the genre. Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey were brothers from Pennsylvania who formed the Dorsey Brothers Orchestra. They eventually split up and pursued their own individual careers. Joe King Oliver was one of the most influential figures in jazz. His band, King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band, was one of the earliest jazz band successes. Bessie Smith was the greatest of the blues singers of the late 1920s and early 1930s. Her recording of St. Louis Blues with Louis Armstrong is considered one of the classic jazz recordings of the 1920s. With all this music, we have to talk about dance. An early form of clubbing existed in the 1920s, the dance hall. As dancing became more and more popular as a recreational activity following World War I, ballrooms opened across the country in every major city. But to maintain a sense of decorum, most big city dance halls were segregated by having both white-only and black-only facilities. These dance halls and the accompanying jazz music helped Southern migrants adjust to life in the large cities of the North. The move to the suburbs, television, and the whites' flight from the cities led to the decline of the dance halls. Do we even know the names for dances anymore? Probably not. Although it was developed in 1914, the foxtrot remained one of the most popular dances of the 1920s. The dance, named the Black Bottom, was originally introduced by blues singer Alberta Hunter in 1924. The Lindy Hop, named in honor of Charles Lindbergh, became the dance craze that would become swing. But by far, the Charleston became the most popular dance of the 1920s. So watch this video clip featuring the Charleston. Does this dance look like fun to you?
The youth movement was encapsulated by the most popular dance of the era, the Charleston. The Charleston had its roots in African-American culture, but its infectious rhythm soon swept through the white youth of America, who were drawn to its wild, jerky movements and cheerful, upbeat tempos. The dance's fast movements made the loose dresses of the flappers mandatory, and men were often known to wear wide-legged pants called Oxford bags. The Charleston gave young Americans an excuse to kick up their heels and enjoy life.